And I believe that I am live over here, but, we can never truly be sure. These things are so tricky.
They really are, though. Like, it's gotta be one of the weirdest things to deal with.
Is it on now? Do I wait a few seconds? Also, stopping it, I've never been entirely certain when, is there a gap between when I've stopped it and when it actually stops streaming? Or is it, go back a few seconds?
So that actually depends on, what's your delay on your stream. It's supposed to stop the moment you hit stop, but if you have a large delay, it'll last, a few seconds longer till it catches up where you hit stop at.
Okay.
And other times, if you're too far behind, it'll just cut your stream off early before you've even said, goodbye. So really, good luck.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
That's the problem I realized when I was doing a lot of gaming streams. All of my outros had been cut off. It was lovely.
Good.
But that's not what we're here to talk about today.
What are we here to talk about today? What is it? What could it be?
What could it possibly be? That's not
elaborate
in the title.
I can't read the titles. I just click on links when they show up. I never paid attention to that sort of detail.
Well, first.
Oh yeah.
This is your newbie Noah.
I am Noah and I'm your newbie.
And I'm your host Taylor for this episode. And Noah, you never caught Carmen Miranda's Ghost, the 1989 filk album?
Wait, we're talking about an album? I have Venkman and Harold over in the other corner here with a box with a very angry Spanish woman trapped inside. Were we not supposed to go out and catch a specter for this episode?
No, we were not.
Please ignore the fact that I just pretended that one of the Ghostbusters' last names was Harold, but I can only remember Venkman and Spengler? Were those Ghostbusters? Garfield, Venkman, and Spengler, right?
I'm not even gonna lie, I just remembered the dad from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids again, and, the guy, Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks is not in the Ghostbusters.
Is he not? Who's the guy?
You're thinking of Garfield. Bill Murray.
Bill Murray! That's his name! Bill Murray!
You confused Tom Hanks with Bill Murray, and I think that actually is a sin punishable by death.
Dude, I don't know. I don't know. It's whatever.
So, to bring this back to the topic of the album, okay. Boys, you can let her go. I don't care if she throws ecto oranges at you. Let her go. Okay, so on the subject of the album, what is this album? Because I've not heard of this, and I know that this is a tale as old as time, as old as this podcast at the very least, which makes it about 9 months old. Oh my gosh. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but it feels like a lot to have a podcast go on for 9 months, I swear. Anyway, I've not heard of this album. I had not heard of any of these people that made this album, and although I was someone who again had a dad that was really into Gaelic Storm because of Titanic, I'm at least vaguely familiar with some of the styles being played with here. A lot of this was super new to me, so
it's always weird for me to hear people are aware of Gaelic Storm just because of the Titanic movie, because I've never watched the Titanic movie. I've never been allowed to watch it. And I just wasn't interested when I was an adult, so I didn't care. So I don't know them from that. I know them from their, long history of music they've released. I always forget they're in that movie.
I mean, I've never seen Titanic either. I know them from my dad, who knows them from Titanic.
Okay, so Carmen Miranda's Ghost is a flick album, which means it's folk music, kind of inspired by science fiction, fantasy. It's a very specific subgenre.
It's a genre fiction folk music.
It's a genre fiction
but
folk
not
music that's a subgenre within other folk music, which also tells stories sometimes. It's weird. I don't know a lot about musical genres, but that's where this one technically qualifies. And it was written by Leslie Fish and it's performed by Leslie Fish and Vic Tyler. Vic Tyler might have helped with some of the writing. I could not find a lot of information on this album, so that's what I know.
So, do you know who, like, published this? Was this, like, self-published on cassette? Was there, like,
it was published. I do know who published it. Because that is actually on its discography wiki. And it was published by the label, by... The producer was Terry Lee, and the label was Firebird Arts and Music.
Okay.
And it's 45 minutes long, and it was released on tape, which, I don't know about you, Noah, but my great-grandparents used to have a tape player in the car, and that was what we listened to instead of the radio. Huh. So, I actually grew up listening to a lot of tape music and learning how, like, to keep them in condition. Not that I have one anymore. This I found thanks to YouTube.
Huh. You know, we had tapes growing up. As someone who is also, like, early Gen Z, ergo, like, around at, like, the tail end of watching analog media get annihilated.
Yeah.
You know, we had some tapes running around. We had CDs. We still have so many CDs.
We have a lot of CDs that my mom spent hours learning how to burn music onto. Because, like, she didn't have a iPod or anything.
Yeah.
So that's just how she, like, listened to her rock albums and stuff. And my great-grandparents just had a huge collection of, like, 30-plus tapes in the middle of their car that they would just carry on car rides, and then you got to pick. Sometimes the kids just listened to the Chipmunks Christmas music in the middle of April, and it just happened. We just did. Okay?
Wow, I can't... It's really impossible, and frankly, incredible.
But, that's basically what I know about the album. I've listened to a lot of Leslie Fish in the past. I really like her Avalon Rising music, which I found after listening to Heather Dale and S.J.'s Tucker Avalon-inspired music that was part of a play they did that follows mostly Morgana and Guinevere's friendship and history. Mordred Lullaby is part of that album, and if you've heard that, you've heard the music, and that's how that led me to Leslie Fish and so many others. But I'm an Avalon nerd.
These are some really interesting people. I have only been able to, like, scratch a little of the surface, but every little detail I find out about Ms. Fish paints, frankly, a legendary picture. Possibly one worthy of worship, frankly. Just absolutely
I wouldn't go that far.
Just astonishing figure.
She's a very big she's an anarchist, and she's a very big believer in preparing for the day civilization becomes so unstable it just ends.
The prepper anarchists, the most exciting kind.
And she's really big on gun rights, and that's, like, one of the areas I would disagree with her on. So I'm gonna go so far as to, like, worship, but, you know, it is what it is. Her music, though, is fucking fantastic.
Didn't she, like... Okay, I swear I saw something like this on the wiki. It mentioned, like, a bunch of land donated for the use of, like, LARPers and the Society for Creative Anachronism and naturists.
Yeah,
and other miscellaneous. I
think that's a thing. I also saw that on the wiki. That's all I know about it.
Okay, so a woman with money and some thoughts, some very 90s anarchist thoughts, and a taste for role-playing games. Clearly, this music... I know, okay, I'm coming at this sort of like the guy that's only seen Boss Baby seeing his second movie, but as someone whose main experience with, like, 20th century science fiction, literary science fiction as a whole is, like, Anne McCaffrey and Traveler, I'm getting some pretty strong Traveler vibes off of this.
So, this album, or the Carmen Miranda song specifically, actually inspired short story anthology written in the same universe, supposedly, as this album. And Anne Catherine actually wrote one of the stories in there, if not more than one. I know she wrote at least one because she's listed on the cover of the book.
Well, I bet she is. She's Anne McCaffrey. Man, that is cool. And that really raises an interesting question. I when we get to talking about world building, I really am curious what it means to write a story in this universe, because, well, this is an anthology, but it's not one that's really bound by unifying arcs of action or any like broader political conflicts or specters of individual character. And tonally,
you just gotta try and tie shit together.
But I think the thing is that I think that there is some continuity and connective tissue to like break down, but I guess we'll get into that later.
But first, let me explain what this album actually goes through. So,
yeah, please do.
All of these songs take place in the same universe. However, that does not mean they take place at the same times or in the same locations within said universe. In fact, there's nothing that actively ties any of it clearly in one congruent, like, linear story. You just have 12 different songs to listen to, and you gotta try and piece stuff together. The first one is the title of the album itself, and it's Carmen Miranda's Ghost. And it's actually the one that inspired the book, and is the book's titled after, called Carmen Miranda's Ghost is Haunting Space Station 3. So, that begins the story, and it's all about these space... They call them spacefarers and space sailors, kind of like they're sea sailors, but in space instead. And they're getting drunk while on break, and they swear up and down they've seen Carmen Miranda's ghost, and she's like rolling fruit around and has her signature fruit hat on, and the song begins with a little bit of like a samba music playing in the background before the lyrics actually start, and like a homage to the kinds of dance and music she would sing and perform to. Then you just go off the deep end. Forget that happened, because the next song is all about Dawson's Christian. And Dawson's Christian is the name of a ship that was in this big fight with an unknown enemy, where the 3 other ships on their side were completely torn apart. But nobody knows what happened to Dawson's Christian. And now it's like the Black Pearl. We're sailing the space, randomly showing up, destroying pirates, and vanishing again. And actually saves the narrator of that song, who was going to be destroyed by pirates because they had no way to defend themselves. Dawson's Christians showed up with Jamie at the lead. He destroyed the pirate ship and then took off. After they see all the gash wounds in it, which means everybody's definitely dead. Everybody's definitely dead. There's no way they would have lived on that. They would have flown into space. So they have no idea who's manning the ship or what's going on. Everybody decided it's Ghost. It's a ghost ship. It just vanished into nowhere. It didn't move or anything. It's gone now. Then you have the Good Ship Manatee, and I love this song, but it's basically like it's a song about Farscape, basically.
Yeah, that's about it. It's about a Farscape level of, spaceship.
One of those lines in the song is like, it's a good ship manatee. Nobody knows how it flies, but it's here. And nobody knows how the crew is still alive, but they are. And you get like every stanza is about a different crew member, and others are like mentioned in one line within the crew members' stanzas. And it gives such a clear personality of each character, even though you don't hear anything else about them in the rest of the song or the album. It's just a fun little go-to song all about the good ship manatee, how it's barely hanging on, but the crew's still there. It's great. And that is followed by a sad-ass song called Bomber, which is
the first of several.
Which is basically, hey, you just had this great song about crew members sailing in the space and going past stars and arguing with each other in the small livable space. Now you're gonna hear about the guy who bombed Nagasaki.
Space Nagasaki.
Space Nagasaki. And the song follows the point of view. The narrator for the song is actually a space marine who doesn't want to be here, doesn't want to do this, and doesn't sleep at night anymore because he constantly hears the screams of the people who he's bombing on the planet below him. That's it. That's the song. It's heavy and it jumps right back into kind of a lighthearted mood that turned into tragedy. This album is all over the place. It's got dark themes, it's got fun themes, it's got both in some songs. Some Kind of Hero is the fifth song on the track, and it's one of my personal favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And it follows the story of these three people chilling in a bar. They've all gotten here from different circumstances. Captain Jeb is half alive, and his ship he's half alive like his ship is what the line says. So you get an idea of how they're both barely going on. Molly ended up in the bar after chasing drugs and no longer being able to be part of a crew because she was always constantly chasing the next high. I know, her name is Molly, and she was chasing drugs. Wonder if that meant anything. And then you've got our narrator, who is this kid who wanted to be part of the Navy Marines, but couldn't be. For some reason, he didn't qualify. And now he's stuck, and now he's just chilling in the bar with these two other people. Well, the space station they're on is about to blow up. So all 100 of the people who live on the station all gather into Jeb's ship, and they take off to save the day. And one by one, the heroes die, saving everybody on the space station until it's just the narrator left, and he's the one hero that gets sung about that everybody remembers, even though he feels like Jeb and Molly deserve to be remembered more than him because they actually did a lot of the work, and he was just the one that they kept alive because they didn't want the kid to die. And you get an idea that he's younger than both of them, even though age is never given.
And that's sort of the general range of tone for the rest of the album kind of going forward.
Yeah.
We have everything from more ghost stories to more, Space Mariner comedy shanties to tragic tales and grand epics about the unfairness of, well, just about everything, but
Everything.
also but also and especially, the lives that get lost as part of being a space traveler.
Yeah.
It's really broad.
It's so broad, but I feel like there's three main kind of characters that get touched upon constantly throughout the album, and that's your space marines who are part of the space navy, who either don't want to be there or wanted to be there and now regret their life choices or literally haven't ever thought of anything else. Then you've got the common people who are just trying to survive, and life is either chaotic or not for them. And then you've got the heroes, and they're always part of one of the first two until something arises and they have to be a hero now.
And that is very much, it's got this sort of set of ways that people can interact with this sort of space travel. Those are the only real reasons why anyone would be there, Yeah. Are you a Marine? Are you a private worker? Are you a pirate? Or are you just someone who's living to the sidelines of these things?
Were you someone who, didn't want to be in space, but you were born there and you have no way of getting anywhere else?
Oh, yeah.
That's the story of Sam Jones.
It's very... And, of course, in terms of genre, it's pulling from a lot of different spaces because, it's pulling from these sort of mariner's tales. It's pulling from, naval ideas. in terms of just anything related to the ocean, but also sometimes specifically military, stories. And from within that like larger umbrella, again, you've got the propaganda song that pops up in the second half, Space Hero, which is, if you're a fan of Paul Verhoeven's Space Marines, you should probably just listen to this track and have a good time.
I personally really like that song for the ending very specifically because, like, the first half of it is typical propaganda stuff. Think about how great this would be! And then you get the one line in the middle about, do you want to wake up at the crack of dawn every morning? 'Cause you're gonna! And then right after that, it takes a turn and it just talks about all the shitty stuff and how, well, you're in it now, bud! There's no going back.
It's very straightforwardly about, man, being a space marine is not a good thing. And it is, in fact, a very miserable and pathetic existence. Uh-oh. This is not a good thing to be.
No, it's not. At one point they talk about how, like, all the latest weaponry you won't be using, but it'll get used on you test subject.
Don't worry, all the latest weaponry, you'll get to experience it firsthand. Besides that sort of military story and the bomber, which is a kind of another kind of negative view, one that doesn't even play with the tongue-in-cheek of it all.
It's just I hate life and I don't want to be here anymore.
This is not a good thing to be. But you also have things that are a bit more straightforwardly. I guess also One Last Battle also counts. A navalman writing to a lover that he may never return to see.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the straightforward kind of stories about civilians, like your Sam Joneses, like your
good ship
some
manatees.
Kind of heroes. Yeah. Just all sorts of stuff like that. And then you've also got the space ghost stories, which I think really draw from kind of a seafaring tradition. We all know, super superstitious. Lots of lovely stuff getting pulled out for there, including Carmen Miranda's ghost, who is haunting Space Station 3, which, out of ways to open up a album like this is probably my favorite. And I say that as somebody that had us listening to Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, which has a choice opener, if you've ever listened to it. Anyway, the kind of last category, though, is like the half shanties, half western songs, of which my supreme favorite entry has got to 1000% be New Sins for the Old, which is just about a bunch of washed up pirates that are really, really, really bored of all this raping and pillaging. It has just gotten... That's literally
the line they say. All this everyday violence is just so boring now. So what do you do when you're bored of violence and you no longer want to do the job you've been doing for years?
It's just...
Apparently you father at least one more bastard and raise that one even though you haven't raised any of the others. That's what they settle on.
It's time to have a kid, maybe. Time to settle down. It's great.
You've already had at least a dozen of kids, but now you're gonna have one more, and this one you're gonna stick with because you're bored. That's such a great message.
It's like a better version of A Pirate's Life for me. That's what New Sins for the Old is. Imagine Space Falstaff is singing A Pirate's Life for me, and that's about what New Sins for the Old is.
A Pirate's Life for me is what they sing when they just start being a pirate, and then by the end they're singing Old Sins
for the
New
Old
Sins for
Pirates.
the Old. Yes.
New Sins for the Old. That is hands down my favorite of all the tracks. It doesn't have like the gravitas of Sam Jones, which is probably, I think, the best, the grandest, I guess. It's got the most pathos and the tragedy of watching Sam Jones, this new young shipboy that begs to be on a ship only to eventually kind of die tragically alongside this engineer mentor / pseudo parent figure that they become attached to save, sacrificing themselves to save the ship. Great story and epic. Well worthy of being the penultimate entry in the entire album. But I think just in terms of ones that I'm going to be replaying the most, New Sins for the Old is going like right up at the top. It is...
I can't believe you're putting New Sins for the Old over Kate Mitchum and Sam Jones' Final Stand.
Oh. It is a heartbreaking final stand it is so like steeped in a love for like science fiction genre and
Yeah.
storytelling, but also naval stories. It's impossible to listen to Sam Jones and not, have whatever part of your brain was exposed to Treasure Island or Treasure Planet, as the case may more likely be.
I'm not gonna
Uh,
lie, New Sins for the Old really makes me think of Treasure Planet's John Silver.
yeah, it's definitely got the same sort of vibe. You can definitely see that sort of Long John Silver singing the same song if the chance afforded itself.
The fact that there's only one song in between them, and it's Space Hero.
Yeah.
In between the two really ties that well together to me. You could just make a bunch of AMVs of Treasure Planet to these songs.
You really could. Or Firefly, or Farscape, or,
really anything.
It's really a curious thing, and I think what I really appreciate about this album, and what I think is one of the big lines of continuity here, is that it does such a good job of highlighting through song and through musical tradition the kind of key real world and real-ish world genres that the 20th century kind of really affixed to science fiction, at least in English language literature.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have Mariner and Navy tales, and on the other hand, you have Westerns. And those are kind of the two big lenses through which, that kind of century of science fiction saw the genre. And this really captures it well, and with some really great tunes.
That's fair. So, like, there are... Why do you like New Sins for the Old very, like, specifically? If you can chop it down to, like, one or two things specifically before we move on to another one.
Well,
because
like I said...
I hadn't heard this... Okay, so full disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
I have never listened to the full album until yesterday. Okay? I heard all the Leslie Fish songs. I had heard one of the Vic Tyler songs. I hadn't listened to the other ones until yesterday. And I still recommended it, so fight me. I don't care. It's still before you. But this was not one of the ones that I thought would end up being one of your favorites. So I'm really curious as to why it is.
I think, well... I there's something about the tone of it. There are a lot of body songs here. A lot of, B-A-U-D-Y, but you could also spell it B-O-D-Y, frankly, given the subject matter. You've got Spaceman's Dilemma, I think is the biggest one, which is just a song about all the different, like, sex workers that this man has run into. Or just women that he has had sex with.
It's not even sex workers. It's like women who he thinks are obsessed with him that he could marry if he wants. But he has to choose one tonight because all the others are going to leave after he makes his choice. And they're all waiting for him to make the choice. And I fucking hate it. I fucking hate it. Ooh.
That one really is diving into the body, very misogynistic tradition of, seafaring songs. This one is too... Very much so. I won't deny. New Sins for the Old does have a lot of that. It's got, but there's something about the tone of its lines, the way it approaches the subject matter, the whoring and boozing and passing out afterwards. It's getting monotonous day after day. It's just a solid. I think that it is a line that really captures just a fun tone that you don't see in this sort of. That I am not used to. Maybe it's one that crops up a lot in this sort of subgenre, but was kind of new to me, this point of view of like, yeah, I was totally cool with hedonism, and I don't really have anything essentially wrong with it, but just like...
I'm bored now.
I just don't feel fulfilled by this anymore, and I can't, and as much as I love doing it, I can't deny that I want something more, and I'm realizing some of the mistakes I made getting here, but I'm not really full of regret.
I do really find it hilarious that the new thing that they want to try out is not like reconnecting with any of their old children. It's just I'm just gonna have a brand new kid, and I'll be around for that one. Yeah. I'm not gonna bother with the other ones I know exist. I'm just gonna make a new one, and that'll like make me not bored anymore. I think that's actually why I'm more forgiving of this song than I am of Spaceman's Dilemma. Because with this song, it feels like it knows that these are horrible things to say, and it's just taking a piss. Like, it's just going to have fun with it. But Spaceman Dilemma feels like it's the kind of song I would hear, like... So, in the Mass Effect fandom, there are some people who only play the games for the aliens you can date. And they very much just enjoy the banging different kinds of aliens as Commander Shepard. And it feels like this is the song they would sing the loudest while doing it. And I just hate that. Like, there's so much more to the game. There's so much more to this album. Why is the... I'm not... No...
More notches in the space garter belt.
It doesn't feel like it's making fun of the type of person who would sing this type of song as much as it's just, yeah, we're gonna throw this in just to throw it in and have a bit of fun singing it, which is fine. They had fun singing it and that's cool. I can't stand it.
That's probably why I like Nuisance for the Old compared to the other. I don't know if there are any Shakespeare fans in the audience. There's only kind of sort of half of one present between the two of us. But if you're a Falstaff fan, as I am, this is the Falstaff song, like I said earlier. And if you like that sort of trash person, but is also kind of self-aware and is pretty squirmy and slimy, but also just kind of ultimately has like a moral foundation hiding in somewhere there and a degree of self-awareness, and just like a fun worldview that it's like interesting and exciting to be around, like you're gonna enjoy this. And I think that's what I really appreciate about this, is the kind of twisted, fun perspective of it all, and also just that it's kind of the most Western-y sort of sounding one.
So, I'm actually surprised the good ship Manatee wasn't your favorite. Because a lot of the times we talk about sci-fi, and we talk about, like, tropes that happen in sci-fi, and we talk about Farscape. Whenever we talk about Farscape, it kind of feels like this is the kind of song that really embodies the stuff you enjoy about Farscape, that I'm just kind of surprised this one wasn't your favorite. So, what'd you think? How come?
It's funny. Maybe it's because it was like the third track in the album and I was still kind of getting used to everything. But I did enjoy it. I like kind of the zaniness, the cartoon of it all. And this is sort of the one that kind of steps, full cartoon without even a hint of, the supernatural going on.
Yeah.
I guess I just, I don't really have anything strongly against it. I liked kind of the outrageous caricatures that were all the characters. I loved how much it felt like a random like role-playing game meme about a bunch of weird PCs. I think that your point that the doctor sounds like the healer or the medic from
Team Fortress 2
made a lot of sense as somebody that hasn't played a lot of Team Fortress 2 but has watched all of the character intro videos a few times.
So, I actually haven't played Team Fortress 2 until this year when my cousin got me on the game for the first time. But I've read all the comics and all the online comics, and I've watched all the character intros. So that was the limit of my knowledge for a long time.
It was definitely fun. It definitely felt like people that were fans of Star Trek but wanted to see it cranked up a bit more, and I'm sure they were very excited when Farscape came around and gave them exactly that. My
one, issue with this song is that they don't explain why the ship is, and I quote, they say, all hail the Manatee, heads up, she's passing by. They say she is the oddest ship that ever tried to fly. But it never explains why she's the oddest ship. It never explains why the good old Manatee is odd. Just that all of the crew is bizarre. The captain takes up all of the rec room trying to build a life-size a literal life-size city.
That first line there about the captain building a scale model of the Palace of Versailles had me thinking, oh, wait, is the entire ship just like a flying Palace of Versailles in space? Is that why it's so absurd?
You would think, but it's just the rec room.
Just the rec room has a Palace of Versailles in it. Don't worry, the manatee's got something else going on. Maybe it just is a giant manatee. Maybe this is them The one kind of trope that they didn't hit was space whales. And how can you not hit space whales? Maybe the manatee is the space whale.
It could be that the manatee is like a space whale and the rec room is the stomach.
I, if anybody in the audience watching knows, could like comment or review or like add us on Twitter with the answer. I want to know. I get why so much of like science fiction has this like naval foundation. There's a lot of parallels to be made and a lot of parallels that have at this point become made so frequently that my tiny little human brain could probably not like really separate them from the genre anymore.
I mean, yeah.
But why specifically space whales? Where did that come from? And why is it everywhere?
Okay, so I actually do know a little bit about why space whales is such a common theme and is a really like big thing. And that's because when sailing across the world was really difficult and dangerous, well, it's still dangerous and difficult, but more so, all these legends about sea monsters rising up and destroying ships were really common. They became an integral part of seafaring culture, just like ghost stories. If you have a sea monster, you're gonna have a ghost story, and vice versa. And that just happens when you're sailing across the ocean. You have people who have those stories. But a lot of the times, the giant monsters they were talking about were whales and manatees that were misunderstood. So, if you're traveling through space and it's the last final great frontier other than getting to the bottom of the ocean, you're also going to have ghost stories and monster legends that come up once you start going far away from planets that are habitable and you're just alone out in space. So the idea is that there's going to be creatures that are like space whales that will inspire legends of monsters that are actually just going to be space whales, which is why they're so common in like Star Wars, and I'm sure Star Trek has something about them too. But it's why they're used in a lot of
idea.
But it's
you
why
have no idea the space whales in Star Trek.
But it's why a lot of them use space whale trope. It's why space whale is a trope, because it was such a big part of legends and the mystery and the dangers that were on traveling the seas. So you don't.
Well, there you go.
You don't need somebody to at you at Twitter. You just need a nerd.
If y'all need to understand why they're space whales when they eventually make that X-Men / Starjammers movie in the future, and you're wondering, hey, why is Storm being regenerated inside of the mouth of a space whale? That's why. That's why Storm is being regenerated inside the mouth of a space whale. I'm sure
it also has to do with, like, what's that story in the Bible? It's not Jonah, is it?
Jonah.
That gets swallowed?
It is Jonah.
It is Jonah that gets swallowed by the whale. My Sunday school teacher would be shocked that I remember that.
That is like the... Good for you. Good for you. You got Jonah.
Listen, none of my Sunday school teachers are proud of where I'm at in life right now.
That's,
But the point of the matter is, like, that's why space whales are such an integral part, because if space is the next ocean that you're going to be sailing through with ships and everything, you might as well carry the monsters over. The misunderstood monsters.
And that's sort of the...
Yeah.
And that kind of ties into one of the other kind of big motifs here, and one that, you made a point of noting that earlier, is the idea that this doesn't have much in the way of contiguous themes and motifs. It's got a broad scope here, but like we've already said, they're kind of clear boundaries isn't the right word for it, but there is definitely some common like approaches, not just genre, but also ideas about what makes space in a space story. And one of those things is that space is dangerous, man, and we shouldn't be there.
Space is so dangerous.
Most of these stories are either are in some way about
somebody dying.
Of dying in space. Either because of space or because of things that you were doing in space. Like most of these songs are about how space will kill you. So
all the deaths in the album are a result of something going wrong with the ship, getting caught in the gravity of a asteroid or planet that you then have to escape from, but your ship isn't able to make the jump on its own, so you gotta risk your life. escaping explosions,
Mm-hmm.
and then everybody else lives and you die. Pirates, and then ghost ship that destroy pirates. Those are the deaths in the album. They're all from something that either went wrong with the ship, went wrong with the station, pirates, or ghost. And the ghost only kill pirates? Nobody else dies from a ghost.
Don't worry, these aren't malicious ghosts.
They aren't malicious. In fact, they're in two situations the ghosts are very helpful. Carmen Miranda is an oddball. She is a ghost from planet Earth who just wants to see space because space wasn't around when she was alive or for the first few centuries after she died. So she's just moving on up with all the people because, of course, ghosts are gonna come with. If ghosts exist, they're gonna come with.
That's such a great concept, though, isn't that? Like,
I love it.
it's so good. Oh man. Eventually we have to do 2001. Not 2001 Nights.
So
not the movie 2001 Space Odyssey, but the manga 2001 Nights. It's got a lot of similar cool stuff going on.
in this album, you don't know where Earth is. Earth isn't mentioned. The moon is, and Mars is, and they're seen as like populations that like have really cool space bars, but otherwise they become too big. So you don't go near them anymore unless you're doing a job. But Earth doesn't get mentioned, so I like the idea that this is like after Earth has been abandoned. So all the ghosts came with because they didn't want to be alone on Earth anymore. I like that headcanon.
It's excellent. But like, yeah.
But most of the time
Like
the
you were
ghosts
saying.
are beneficial or they're just hanging out. And
The net equation, space is dangerous, we shouldn't be here.
yeah, space is dangerous, we shouldn't be here, but ghosts can thrive and survive. Sometimes they'll help you survive.
And that really ties into the naval origin of a lot of the storytelling. You know, I mentioned Western as also as an influence, but that's all. Truthfully, that influence mostly has to do with kind of musical flourishes and also just occasional, I guess, like moods that it's set into. Especially, you know, like I said, you know, in these new synths for old men. And also, I think you can make the arguments for just about any of the songs that sound like they're being sung in a bar or a cantina have a lot of that same kind of flourish that you would expect from a Western song.
Yeah.
And maybe a couple of like the arcs that you would expect from like, what's that?
Some kind of hero is actually being sung in a cantina.
Yeah.
It's the narrator starts off by asking the piano man to write a song and play it for him about his good friend Captain Jeb and Molly, his good friends Captain Jeb and Molly who died, and he got all the credit for it.
Yeah, and those definitely all smell very Streets of Laredo. Like you've got that same sense of like heroic tragedy coming off of them. But
That's not where my mind went with it, but I can see why you would go there.
Anyway, so while there's a lot of this kind of underlying fear of space and space travel, I think feels very naval, very seafarer, the same sense, because of course, you know, if the sea is dangerous and deadly and absolutely will kill you if given the chance, and the sea will do that, she will absolutely do that. She doesn't care about you.
Why the fuck would she? Space is gonna be the same. Space is gonna be the sea on drugs.
Space is what if the sea, but they were on roids. Not only do they not care, they actually kind of actively hate and want to annihilate you.
Yeah, it turns out you're not supposed to be here, so fuck off.
Yeah, you have one place in all the known universe that you're going to be safe, and you decided to leave that place. You have forfeited your right to not being alive. To being alive.
I was about to say, you kind of went the opposite way there.
You have forfeited your right to not being dead.
But I do kind of like the idea that even though in all the chaos in space, and there's hundreds and thousands of ways you can die, there's one song about how space doesn't try and keep you alive, but the people in the past who have died in space are. And that's Guardians. And I know I'm kind of like jumping. I've been trying to get to this song for the last few minutes because I really like it. And Guardians is a song all about this survivor of a crash who has to send an SOS signal. He's they are the last person surviving and living. Everyone else is dead. No one else can send the SOS. And if they don't get to it, they're gone. So they're crawling to the SOS, and every time they try and stop because they're tired and exhausted, and what's the point? Another ghost from the past shows up to offer them aid and encourage them to keep on going. And I really like this song because, like Carmen Miranda, it includes like historical people.
At the end, there's this twist, and he like looks up when he gets to like the final base, and he sees faces he recognizes, and he's like, "Wait a minute, I just saw you."
Yeah. So he doesn't know the ghost. You think that maybe they're his friends because, like, he calls them friends. So maybe they were his crew who's now dead. But then in the end, you go to a station that talks about all the pioneers of space travel that have come and gone. And it's Gus, Edward, and Roger from the Apollo 1. It's Ronald and Krista, who were part of the Challenger crew, and some of the other women on the crew. It's the Russians from Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 11 who died in trying to get to space. It's just all these iconic figures that maybe they wouldn't know because there's been so many people traveling through space now, but it's in this one station, and they were there helping this one guy, or one person. I don't know if it's ever said if they're male or not. This whole album kind of defaults to the male perspective. There's only like 2 or 3 women mentioned in it that aren't like being sexualized, so I just kind of accidentally default to that too.
And it never are we getting a song from the explicit perspective of a woman.
Yeah, all the narrators are either called he, him, or their gender's never specified. But so this person sends out the SOS. They survive. They get to the station. They find out it's all these heroes from the past who pushed them on, and they just kind of stop and stare as if it's a final goodbye from them who saved their life. And I love it. I think that's soft and sweet. And, like, even if space tries to kill you in a world where ghosts exist and they actively participate in things, sometimes they're gonna be there for you. Jamie saved his old buddy, or at least the person talks as if Jamie was an old buddy. And the ghosts, your ancestors are always gonna be watching out for you when you're traveling in an area you definitely should not be. Apparently.
That's definitely the second underlying thread. Space wants you dead. Most people don't.
Yeah. Unless they're pirates. The pirates want you dead.
Pirates want you dead, but maybe they'll get bored of it.
Pirates want you dead, and aliens are enemies. Otherwise, they don't get mentioned. We only hear aliens mentioned twice, and it's in the war songs, and they're both called the alien enemies.
These people definitely had some thoughts about Heinlein if you asked them. I bet you 1,000% they'd have some very strong opinions about Heinlein if you, like, sat down and were like, so what do you think of Space Marines, the novel? What are your thoughts?
I have to. Isn't that a movie, Space Marines? That's what you keep talking about, right?
It is also a movie. The Paul Verhoeven movie is essentially a feature-length lampooning of every concept in the novel by Robert Heinlein. The whole movie is just a pastiche of fascism and patriarchy and all sorts of nonsense. It's
basically what's in here too, because you have no idea what the government's like, but if everybody's either a space marine or trapped in space, what happens? Like, what happens?
That's why I say that's sort of it's super hyper militaristic, and that's kind of part of why I feel like I can get away with making the Traveler comparison. I've got a dog in the corner here, hence all the jingling sound you're probably noticing. This poor old man here needs attention. So the thing about the role-playing game Traveler, which I recently got my hands on, like, the first edition from, like, the late 70s, and I've, like, spent quite a bit of time kind of poring over the first few rulebooks. I haven't finished it. This is a game from the late 70s that has a lot of rules about, like, the logistics of like ordering your own ship and like the economics of maintaining one and the fuel costs and all that. It's nonsense, but also fascinating. But one of the things that's interesting about character generation in Traveler is that you don't really get to pick a class. You're basically like playing the life of your character. And one of the first things you do is try to apply to one of like 6 different basically schools so you can be a part of, or not even schools, just like career paths. And like 4 of them are military. One is merchant class, and then I think there's like an other category. It is very clearly, it's never stated. We don't get much in the way of specific information about the world. You get rules about how the economics of things work. You get rules about like the technology, but there's never anything explicit, any explicit world building, except for the fact that most of your characters are either veterans or people that were selling stuff. And so that, like, much like this album gives this implicit sense of like space is just quietly filled with hyper-militaristic governments that are going around fighting faceless wars against each other, and most people are just kind of trapped in that.
And like gentrification is happening, but on an even grander scale than before, because Mars,
yeah.
There's a mention in the final song, which is just, it's an upbeat pub song about how every spacer enjoys a good spacer bar, and that's where your home away from home is, because you're never gonna make it home, so you might as well sing some songs and enjoy some drinks with your buds.
The Gaelic Storm is very strong in that one.
And then it just talks about like all these different bars and places and you could go to and hang out and are good for space travelers, even if you may get stuck there. And one of the places it talks about is Mars and how it was great until the city slickers came.
Gentrifying Mars.
Gentrifying Mars. I mean, leave it to Elon Musk. That's what it's gonna be.
I mean, if they ever get around to making a successful Babylon 5 spinoff, you know that that's going to be one of the first plots they do, right?
I mean, yeah, because they're already talking about how, like, Mars is a colony and the citizens on there are kind of second class, which is why they keep rising up, but it doesn't matter. Because the rich people visiting don't want to look at them.
Just wait till we get to the end of the series, and you'll really see, like, the foundation of, oh boy, that's not going to go well coming around.
Talking about Babylon 5, this album really makes me think of Babylon 5, and specifically the song Bomber makes me really think of Veer. And the reason for that is because it's all about how the bomber doesn't feel bad about what they're doing, because it's not their fault. They aren't killing these people. It's the guys who ordered them to drop the bombs that are killing the people, but they still suffer from like not falling asleep at night. And that's just all. That was Veer in season 2 of Babylon 5. That was so Veer.
It really is hitting on these big ideas.
At first I was thinking it was a Londo song, but then that last line made me think, oh, this is actually a Veer song.
It's hitting some serious veins. It's like, if you're a fan of anything in the ballpark of what could be called hard science fiction, whatever that means, this definitely is very much going to be your jam. And if you're a fan of anything that isn't hard science fiction but has a strong naval influence, or, you know, it really captures a lot of the major, you know, themes and motifs that go into a lot of those stories.
My foot fell asleep, so I had to move.
It's
so good.
Can we actually talk, because there's so much that draws it and connects it to other science fiction stories and traditions. I think that I would like to talk a bit about what sets this apart as its own, because you mentioned that the short story collection, the book that got published, was all set in the same universe, and I don't entirely understand how that could be, truthfully, because while there are definitely songs that kind of establish a lot of places, and there's some songs that establish legends and concepts that might appear and could potentially be reused, it does never establish really any characters or governments or political bodies. And so I guess I've got some ideas, but I want to hear what your thoughts are first about what kind of makes this its own unique world.
So I don't know what's in the book. I cannot tell you what's in the book because I have not read it, though I am definitely going to be saving up and buying it at some point so I can read it and know what's going on in the book.
Do. I want to hear about this book.
And then I'm going to let you know, and I'm going to send it to you so you can read it.
It's coming up, kids.
It's coming up because I'm very interested since, one, it's Anne McCaffrey, and we've talked about the ups and downs of her sci-fi writing, and two, it's based off this album, which, that's going to be a ride.
Oh, yeah.
But, so basically, this all is happening in the same universe. It's not happening one right after the other. Some of the events could be happening years apart. Some of them could be happening at the exact same time. We don't know. But what really ties it all together for me as a universe is really just the concepts. So, there's a couple concepts that are consistent. If you're born on a station side, then it's difficult to get out of station side. In some heroes, the narrator wanted to join the Navy, but couldn't. And so they're stuck station side, working and cleaning and doing manual labor tasks that they didn't want to do. Making friends with all these people who used to travel across space, but no longer get to. In Sam Jones is a kid born station side whose mother is dead and father was never really in the picture. And so he's just spending his whole life trying to get out, and I guess he doesn't want to join the military or can't either, so he hitches a ride on a random ship with a random crew. And I think that is like a big theme that kind of ties the story together because, again, it's all about the different kinds of people in this world. It's not about who they are or how they tie into each other, but how they're surviving. So
I see.
I think that is what could really tie it together as a universe in and of itself, because we have these vague ideas of like wars that have happened and are currently happening. And then we have ideas of, like, different ship crews that are going around and the ghosts that are around and what they did before they were ghosts. But really what ties it all together is this underlying theme of military and not military. So if you're going to write a short story collection, you're going to write about people that are military or not military. Those are the two groups in this. There's no, in not military, you have pirates versus regular common folk. But that's really it, because you never talk about who the merchants are. You never talk about what the good ship Manatee is doing, or why they're flying around, or what they're going on. People talk about jobs and tasks they have to get done, but they never explain what those are. They just talk about the people they lost trying to finish them.
There's definitely this sense of kind of a quiet underlying kind of solidarity here with everyone. Everybody's trying to survive. Everyone's trying to figure out how to live in a place where they shouldn't be at all.
Except for maybe the pirates. The pirates. They're just trying to fuck shit up. They're just trying to fuck shit up and have fun.
Are the pirates the bourgeoisie, the ones that are like well off enough that they can afford to be existentially bored?
Honestly, probably, if we're being honest.
I mean, but even they aren't really the enemy, because of course they're not the ones that are going to big old wars or forcing people to, go to space, a place where humans should not be ever.
Unlike with real pirates, you never get a sense in the album about anybody being forced to become a pirate.
Yeah, it's pirates as we imagine them to be. A great career path.
It's pirates as we imagine them, not pirates as they actually were. Which is probably the one downside to the new sins for old, I can't remember how it went exactly.
Oh.
Old Souls? It doesn't matter.
Something like that, yeah. New sins for, probably Old Souls.
But it's kind of like an idealized version of the job, which makes it seem like only the rich could afford to do this. Because everyone else doesn't have time to be bored. They're either filling that time with work, drinking, or surviving. And you drink while you work sometimes, apparently.
Oh, you know what else might be why I really like New Sins for Old? That's the actual title. It's just New Sins for Old. I really like Yondu in Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
I
And
actually
that's
have
definitely
a button with it.
it's definitely got that kind of vibe coming off of, very much like oh, this is what like the Ravagers are doing at the retirement home in the sky.
Honestly, I could see that. I would understand why you enjoy it for that. It's just historically, some pirates were very wealthy individuals who took up pirating for different reasons. Power, influence, wanted to fuck over the government, shit that happens. But a lot of pirates were either forced to join crews through indentured servitude, or they were kids taken on because they didn't really have anywhere else to go, and then, history of abuse happens, and they just grew up on the ships and stayed there sometimes if they survived. But in this, you don't get a sense of that. Like, Sam Jones doesn't join a pirate crew. He very specifically sought out, like, just someone he could work on a ship for, but never seems to have considered the pirates. He just literally found a legitimate crew to work for, and lucky him. That's great. But I was not expecting that to be where the song was going. I really thought he was going to join this crew and get a lot of shit, and it was all going to be about him becoming a pirate king. Nah, he's dead at the end. Sam Jones did not survive. He died with Kate Mitchum. They tried to save each other's life, and in the end, they both went out together. Fell off the ship as it traveled through space. On the outside, it sucked. It's sad, but it's a great song.
So what I think the continuity is?
What do you think the
continuity
continuity is?
I think that there's a lot of interesting thematic continuity, and also just clear, like, perspective continuity that I think is really interesting that you pointed out there. I think what really unifies it for me, they're all songs, is the thing. You have to understand. They're all songs. And I know this is an album, so of course they're all songs, but
are you saying they're all in-universe songs?
Yeah, like, unlike things like The Mechanist or Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, where maybe there's like a background lore detail that's supposed to say that no, actually these are in-universe songs, but they never actually really feel like in-universe songs.
Yeah.
These, every single one, I 1000% believe, are in-universe songs that are getting sung around. And ever since, again, we had that like shanty run that went around yesterday and last year. And somebody on Twitter mentioned, I really like the idea of space shanties. These songs that would come around with a spacefaring tradition, and that would serve a practical function, and that would have all sorts of cultural, purposes. This feels like that. Every single one of these songs feels like something that would emerge, and that's what I love, because it is so very clearly tying, these genre connections that have been made in the past, and making them all the closer by using musical genres, not just incorporating stories and concepts from naval books, but incorporating music from like actual naval cultures, incorporating music from actual like pseudo-western like pop culture, and using that to make those genre connections, but also to breathe life into a world and breathe specificity and personality, and tying into your ideas, really connecting with these lower class communities. These aren't the songs of the upper class, space government elite. These aren't the songs of the really wealthy traders. These are what the workers, these are what the people that are stuck on the dock, these are what the pirates are singing. These are what the people
It's what the protesters are singing to get rid of that fucking propaganda.
Yep, this is the anti-propaganda,
That actually makes that propaganda song so much better from that point of view. Yeah. It makes it so much better.
This is what the Marines are like singing to themselves when they're not being monitored by anybody that would care. Like, there.
But that idea makes Spaceman Dilemma like twice as awful. Because that's gonna be the song that, like, misogynistic, bigoted people are singing. Because it even has the G slur in it.
Yep.
And it's just casually thrown in there. And it's all about this one guy trying to... What is he gonna do? Which of these women are he gonna have kids with? That makes me hate that song even more, though. Because that's the one that the drunk asshole at the bar is gonna be singing so loudly when he doesn't go home with anybody.
No justice for the space Romani. I am sorry, Romani people. Apparently, it doesn't get any better in space.
Apparently. You still haven't read The Golden Compass, have you?
I have not read anything
You're
from
not
his
gonna
Dark
like that
Materials.
aspect of it.
Is it? Oh man, I was hoping it was gonna be very like anti-God. I didn't want it to be anti-Romani.
I mean, it's not that it's anti-Romani. It's that it doesn't use the term Romani. There's a group that basically adopts and raises Lyra after she leaves the university she was raised in all of her life, and they're called the Egyptians.
Well, you did your research on the etymology of where that word comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Good for you.
And they're basically they're caretakers for Lyra, and they're very kind people. But you're gonna hate everything about their titles and all that.
Woof. That's a woof for me, Captain.
Yeah. It's not that. It's a big wolf. But man, that makes me really wonder if like the Bomber song and the Sweetheart song, the two war songs that aren't about like that aren't the propaganda one. It makes me really wonder. I guess it makes me wonder if they're about the same war or not. I still kind of want to know if those are both happening at the same war or not, because if so, then that means the bomber is dropping bombs on not just enemy forces, but their own forces as well. And it means that the person who wanted to see their sweetheart probably won't make it back, since the bomber ends with him dropping nukes. Mushroom clouds is what they called them.
It's very, and that totally makes sense. If someone was doing an anthology, I think I'd expect to hear more of this sort of bigger wars. Again, I don't think that we need any. I don't think I've mentioned this before, but I don't think we need any specificity. I don't think this is one thing for that. The anthology wouldn't have been better if they like stopped every 30 seconds to like give me a proper noun that I'll never hear again.
It's not that I want specificity. It's there's specificity in small parts of the songs that make me think of it. Because there's one war mentioned by name. And it's the one mentioned in Jamie Dawson's. And it's the war that Jamie Dawson's Christian survived. And it's the only war mentioned by a specific title. And you don't know anything else about it. And, like, that's a small detail that makes me, okay, I have this bit of information now. Mm-hmm. But I'm not trying to argue for more specificity. I'm just trying to, like, think of how the songs could possibly tie together in more ways than what was explicitly stated. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not, like, trying to point a gun at anybody. I'm just saying, like, there's different kinds of world building. And we're and I'm not looking for the kind of info dump version. I'm just talking about this sort of world that is being conveyed by all the concepts that they wanted to explore in this sort of selection of sci-fi. Like you said, there are no aliens in this.
No, it's all humans. It's a very human-centric space.
But that's not to say that they're not dealing with kind of pseudo-scientific kind of areas of storytelling. Again, there are several ghost stories running around here, but that's that's in keeping with these sort of genre origins, and also and also kind of demonstrative of the sort of world that they have built here.
For science fiction, this actually doesn't have like a lot of science fiction elements outside of ships traveling through space.
Yeah, there's not.
There's no like scientific weapons or like. There's nothing new in it besides the spaceship themselves and the stations and station sides.
But again, it's also, you'd be hard pressed not to say that it isn't deeply in touch with the history of science fiction, like writing in this century that it comes from.
Science fiction is just cowboys and sailors in space.
That is all that it is, really, if you think about it. I look forward to somebody who figures out another fun angle, and not too... I've got a very panty dog here. Distant future.
I feel like Anne McCaffrey kind of touched on more of a fantasy side of sci-fi that doesn't really get put in the genre a lot. If because science fiction is fantasy, yes, but I'm talking about like a high kind of fantasy that doesn't really get mentioned in sci-fi a lot. But there's like whole issues within just, at least in the American writing system, if you write sci-fi, you're less likely to find somebody to publish your fantasy as well, and vice versa, because the two are just so disconnected culturally that people don't think a writer can do both well, and that they should stick to one or the other. And that's something like even George R. R. Martin had trouble getting his work out there for, because he likes writing science fiction and fantasy, but he's so well known for one, they weren't sure if publishing the other would work for him.
You know, and it's funny you'd say that, because I was also just thinking about how much I think this really says about rethinking about how I thought about Anne McCaffrey and Dragon Riders of Pern, because of course McCaffrey famously was very staunch that Dragon Riders was a science fiction series. Yeah, there are dragons, and yeah, there are people riding around in basically castles and, you know, mountains.
Yeah.
This is a science fiction series. She is a science fiction author, and she is writing science fiction, and not just because of like the lore of the background, but in like listening to this album, and reflecting on how McCaffrey might have gotten involved, I realized there are a lot of flourishes in her writing, a lot of methods of storytelling, a lot of conventions that she uses that I think are common in science fiction storytelling, like the way that she relates to the world, and how rather than pause to explain, you know, what a runner beast is, or any like item that might crop up, or even her terms most of the time, a lot of that feels very kind of sci-fi, and a lot of how sci-fi wants to just like get to the story. It doesn't feel like it needs to explain what this bit of technology is, and that's not universal by any means.
It's not
Shout
universal.
out to the poor people that have read Heinlein, but I think that is a flourish, and the way she handles it.
Shout out to the people who have read the Doctor Who novels.
Woof! I'm gonna give a big old woof to that one. What about you, Biscuit? Woof to that? He's too busy panting. He can't woof to that.
But I was just saying, like, if sci-fi is going to be taken in a new direction, one that I would really enjoy seeing is just a merge of sci-fi and fantasy once again. Because you kind of get that in Star Wars, and definitely in some Star Wars more than other Star Wars media. But there's such a disconnect between the two, because people think if you're one, you can't do the other, and they don't mesh well. But I feel like if anything could mesh the two well, it would be kind of like a anthology inspired by this album. This album has a lot of room for fantasy to tie in with the ghost stories that are going on and all the sci-fi traveling happening. And I feel like it would be a really interesting take to see. I doubt that's what happened in the anthology that was written, but once again, once I save up money to buy that book, I will be finding out.
What's interesting, I think, is that in so much science fiction, there is always kind of a drop of kind of a magical element, especially in a lot of science fiction television series. And I think that comes from a place where there was a time when things like psychic research and ESP had enough of like the pseudoscience around it seemed scientific enough that like people that wanted to be hard sci-fi felt they could justify putting it in. And then eventually, obviously, time goes by and that looks ludicrous. But psychics and sci-fi stuck around.
Well, it's actually really interesting that you say that, because the same thing happened with race realism in fantasy. And like, I know I'm jumping into a really deep, heavy topic right now, but we were actually discussing this in one of my anthropology classes about race realism and how it affects literature. But race realism is bullshit. It's it's bullshit. But it was considered a legitimate science for a long time, and anthropologists did a lot to like push it as a legitimate science, and that was wrong. That was gross, but it is what it is, and you have to acknowledge history before you can move on from it. However, that was a big thing that inspired a lot of like different kinds of characters and races in fantasy. I hate calling them that. They're definitely species, but fuck it. And it was a big thing that influenced, like, Tolkien's approach to other races. And I don't know if, like, I don't know if he ever admitted that, but, like, there's a ton of research where you can look and see, like, the racist parallels between, like, the orcs in the story and just African American people and everything else, and how the elves are like the generic white guys that are so great and above all the others.
It's definitely got roots deep. I mean, running down to today.
And that stuff stuck. Even though, like, it was inspired by horrible things, it stuck around, and it's still very prevalent in the fantasy genre itself. So, like, just like psychics stuck in sci-fi, races stuck around in fantasy in a way that kind of still makes them sort of gross. I'm not saying everybody who writes elves is automatically writing a racist stereotype, or who writes orcs are. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a racist beginning that has to be acknowledged.
Yeah. The point that I was kind of orbiting around to with psychics is the fact that they stuck around, and the way that other, like, writers have tried to justify having a psychic or a magical character has kind of resulted in this kind of slip pocket of fantastical elements in sci-fi. And it's really kind of interesting. You know, you have things like Babylon 5, which has psychic characters, and we'll get more into where they go with that, but they definitely subscribe to that, like, if you're old enough, you're functionally indistinguishable from being a magic person kind of belief. But also we get to Farscape, which has we haven't gotten to the line yet, but there's this great Rigel line at some point in the series. Maybe it is early on, actually, where, like, John is like, this is magic, this is nonsense, why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense.
I think that's in season 1.
I think that you're right. I think that is season 1 when they're battling the wizard, and then Rigel's like, look, kid, I don't presume to understand how all of this works, do you? Sometimes stuff just is, okay? And I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to know what could possibly be or not be.
It's funny. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
And I think that is kind of why it's got a staying power, ultimately, this pocket of fantastical elements, just as a representative of the unknown. Because that's sort of the quiet reality of all of science, quote unquote, and the genre that likes to call itself science fiction kind of doesn't deal with enough is this underlying fact that what science is really is mostly just a constant recognition of the fact that you can never really know anything, that you can only be mostly certain, that you can only have data that supports certain, like, theories that you've put together and have built upon the theories of others.
To be fair, scientific theories are different than scientific hypotheses.
The point being just hypotheses that have been proven by consistent data, but still the underlying philosophy and the other underlying, like, theory of truth behind science is that, like, understanding reality is something that you can only ever really guess at and hope to be right and proven right by consistent data, but that you can never really know, if that makes sense. And that, I think, that hint of, like, that constant, like, absence of knowledge is something that I appreciate, and I appreciate the way that magical elements, like, for example, ghosts in space, represent when they show up.
So, it's funny that you brought Farscape up as your opposite example, because I was going to bring it up too, because
well, not as an opposite, but as, like, another, like,
it's on the other end of the spectrum from Babylon 5.
Oh yeah, well,
and its approach to, like, psychics specifically, because
it's definitely
when Scorpius implants a version of himself into John Crichton's mind, John accuses him of being, like, a psychic projection at first, before he realizes, oh no, this is science at work again. And I just always found that to be really interesting, because Babylon 5, everybody just assumes psychics. This has something to do with psychics. And, like, meanwhile, you got John Crichton like, is this magic or science? I don't know anymore.
That is sort of when we get into, I'm sorry we're not doing Farscape episodes, kids, because Farscape is a thing that is worth a lot of discussion.
To be fair, we did kind of like come up with this idea from all of our discussions of him introducing me to Farscape.
That's basically the foundation, and we never finished it. We need to at least finish the season we're on together, because this is kind of anyway.
We'll get to it.
It's a good show, y'all.
It's such a good show. We'll talk about it on some of our small episodes.
We'll continue to bring you up in episodes where we run out of stuff to talk about for the main series. That being said, having listened to the entire album for the first time, what is your thought on it in its entirety, not just the one or the handful of songs you've enjoyed?
I enjoy it. I enjoyed the handful of songs that I had heard before. This is nothing against Vic Tyler. He's a fine singer. I enjoyed listening to his voice, but I still like the Leslie Fish songs better, the ones sung specifically by her. That's probably just because I'm used to her more, but I also feel like she got the most emotionally impactful songs, and that's what I'm here for. So, as a first-time newbie who has never heard any of the songs before today, what did you think, Noah?
I genuinely, I really enjoyed it. I liked, I like to think of myself as someone who's relatively cool with like a diversity of kind of odd genres in music, especially what turns out to be flick music.
I'm gonna take you for a ride.
I enjoy that kind of ride, and I enjoy these sort of sci-fi anthologies. One of these days we've got to do one of the comic like sci-fi anthologies I have on hand, like FTL Y'all, or the older, again, 2001 Nights, which is really good. Has some like, again, it's one of those things that builds its own universe and touches on a lot of common sci-fi themes, but in a new way, or really, raises some, interesting questions that all come back to the personal or the existential, which are basically the same thing, if you ask me.
Might as well be.
Might as well be. And this is fun. I like how it, again, plays with genre concepts and it uses the music well. I love the energy it brings to stuff and a lot of the characters. It's not deep.
It's not deep, but it's not really supposed to be. It's a bunch of ideas thrown out there.
It's a bunch of fun sci-fi ideas thrown together and having a party and like being a few fun songs. If that sounds like your jam and you're all right with the cassette audio peaking a lot on some of these tracks, go off and have fun, kids. It is about half as long as this podcast episode that you've listened to.
Yeah, so it's only 45 minutes.
Go do that. Go have some fun.
If you enjoy this album after listening to that, Leslie Fish did work on another album with a couple other artists that was inspired by Star Trek called Where No Man, and that's the title of the album, and you
Where
need to
No
listen
Man?
to that tonight.
I'm going to have to listen to that over the course of the next week.
That's fair.
Which reminds me...
It's not going to be an episode, though. I don't know enough about Star Trek to, be up to talking about that.
I'm not sure I do, too. Even though I do actually... I quite like Star Trek. Hopefully I'm familiar enough to enjoy the album. That being said, on the subject of next week, or a week after this, depending on if you're watching live or if you're listening to the release schedule, listening after it's been released, edited and all that. The next episode, we got the finale of the sci-fi month, or the sci-fi summer, or sci-fi September, whatever it is.
Let's go!
This sci-fi sequence, on the subject of Star Trek pastiches, the Star Trek pastiche to end all Star Trek pastiches. I'm talking Alan Rickman. I'm talking Sigourney Weaver. I'm talking the guy from Monk. I'm talking.
Wait, the guy from Monk is in this? The guy who played Monk, or the guy who played his boss?
Monk. The guy who played Monk. I'm talking Tim Allen. I guess he's also there.
Okay.
I'm talking Galaxy Quest, kids. We're going on Galaxy Quest, which you definitely don't have to watch Star Trek to enjoy. I watched it a bunch as a kid, never seen any Star Trek, loved it to death. It is fabulous. It is a fantastic window into, sci-fi, Star Trek pastiches, into perspectives on fandom coming into the turn of the century. It is, it's going to be a lot of stuff. We're going to have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. You're going to have a good time. I'm going to have a good time. Go watch it. Everybody's listening. Go watch it.
I mean,
get ready for fun.
I've heard of it, but no, I've never watched it. As evidenced by I didn't even know who all was in it.
You hadn't Alan Rickman. Alan Rickman,
Well,
kids.
okay, to be fair, him and Sigourney Weaver are the only two I've ever seen anything about their characters about. I don't know shit else.
Sigourney Weaver, I've been on an Alien kick for like 2 weeks now. I've seen Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection in their entirety for the first time. I haven't really fully recovered from those two, but I'm still excited to see Sigourney in a thing.
I've just finished a Friday the 13th kick because Friday the 13th just passed.
Yes, that is true. That is fair.
It's got
officially
me on a bunch of
Halloween
horror.
season now. I think it's officially Halloween season from whenever the first Friday the 13th of the year is to October 31st.
I mean, some years you get to Friday the 13th.
The first one. From the first one to October 31st.
That was like April or March this year.
Yeah, it's been Halloween season for a while. I'm surprised you didn't notice.
I didn't. That's great. I love Halloween. It's my favorite holiday.
It's fabulous. Man. And besides, anything to get, the best holiday and the best season together at last for the first time.
All right.
This half of the pod is a pro-summer pod.
I mean, I prefer fall, but...
I am actually a reptile, and I love the heat. And I think that all of the seasons are just a random excuse that we go through to get around back to the heat.
You are so weird. Have a nice night, everybody.
I hope everyone has a lovely night.